And it was one of those Tuesdays where the heat didn't just sit on you. It pressed down like a heavy woolen blanket. High noon in the middle of July, and the kind of day where the asphalt turns soft and sticky, grabbing at the soles of your boots, trying to hold you in place. And the air shimmered off the hoods of the cars parked outside Daisy's diner, warping the world like a bad mirage. Inside, the air conditioning was fighting a losing battle, and the diner smelled like it always did: burnt coffee, bacon grease, and lemon floor cleaner. It was a smell that felt like home to guys like us, and we had taken over the back section. Me, Tiny, Breaker, and about 15 other brothers from the Motor Mafia. We weren't there for trouble, and we were there for the meatloaf special and the iced tea. We were loud, sure. Tiny was laughing at some joke Breaker made, a deep and rumbling sound that rattled the silverware on the tables. But mostly, we were just escaping the sun. But in the front of the diner, near the big plate, glass window, and sat a ghost, Gunner. At 90 years old, Gunner looked like he was made of parchment paper and fragile bird bones. He was sitting alone in a booth meant for 4 people, and the sunlight was streaming in, hitting him directly, illuminating every wrinkle, every liver spot, every gray hair on his head. He wore a faded flannel shirt and buttoned all the way to the top despite the heat, and that cap. That old, navy blue cap with the gold lettering that had started to peel years ago, Cara Vataran. And Gunner wasn't eating meatloaf, he was eating tomato soup. Or, he was trying to. I watched him from across the room. I always kept an eye on Gunner, and he was the reason we were all here. He was the reason I wore this vest. 60 years ago, he stitched the first cut together with fishing line and denim, and he built the Motor Mafia when bikes were just engines on bicycle frames. But time is the one enemy you can't outrun. Not even on a Harley. His hands were shaking, and Parkinson's. It started in his fingers a few years back, just a twitch. Now it was a violently rhythmic tremor that never stopped, and he gripped his spoon with a white, knuckled fist, trying to force his muscles to obey. He dipped the spoon into the red soup. He lifted it. Shake, shake, and half the soup spilled back into the bowl before it reached his lips. A little red drop landed on his chin. He didn't notice. He just focused, and eyes narrowed behind thick glasses, trying to get nourishment into his body. It was painful to watch. A man who once led charges into enemy fire, and a man who once rode a rigid frame chopper across the country with no suspension, now struggling to conquer a bowl of soup. He's having a bad day, Tiny whispered to me, and noticing my gaze. Tiny's voice was low, respectful. Yeah, I said. Heat makes the tremors worse. Should we go help him? Tiny asked. He started to rise, and I put a hand on Tiny's arm. No, let him be. You know Gunner, he's proud. If you feed him like a baby, it'll kill him faster than the disease. Let him fight his battle. And so we watched. Silent guardians, just making sure he was okay. Then the bell above the door chimed. Ding ding. The atmosphere changed instantly. 4 teenagers walked in, and, you know the type. High school seniors, maybe fresh college freshmen. They reeked of expensive cologne and entitlement. They wore varsity jackets unbuttoned, and showing off brand name t-shirts. Their hair was styled perfectly, and their shoes, man, their shoes were pristine. Bright white, limited edition, and worth more than Gunner's monthly pension check. They were loud. Not the deep, brotherly loud of the biker table. They were screechy loud, performative loud, and they wanted everyone to look at them. Man, I am starving, the leader yelled. Let's call him Kyle. Kyle had that look, and the look of a kid who has never been told no in his entire life. He had frosted tips and a smirk that needed to be wiped off with sandpaper. They scanned the diner, and it was packed. The lunch rush was in full swing. Every booth was taken. The counter was full, except for one booth. The booth by the window, and where a 90-year-old man was sitting alone. Kyle nudged his buddy. He pointed at Gunner. They whispered something and laughed. A cruel, sharp laugh. They walked over, and they didn't wait for the hostess. They just marched right up to Gunner's table. They surrounded him like a pack of hyenas circling a wounded lion. I stiffened, and I felt the leather of my vest creak as my muscles tensed. Tiny stopped chewing his burger. Hey, Pops, Kyle said. His voice was dripping with mock politeness, but underneath it was pure venom. You almost done there. Gunner didn't look up immediately. He was in the middle of the arduous process of lifting the spoon, and he was concentrating. I said, Kyle said louder this time, slamming his hand on the back of the booth seat. Are you done? We got a group here. We need the table. And Gunner flinched. The sudden noise startled him. His hand jerked. The spoon hit the side of the bowl. Clink. Gunner looked up slowly. It took him a second to focus his eyes, and he saw 4 towering figures blocking his light. I'm still eating, son, Gunner said. His voice was weak. It sounded like dry leaves scraping together. And I move a little slow these days. No kidding? One of the other kids scoffed. You're moving backwards. Look, just wrap it up, okay? And there are paying customers waiting. I'm a paying customer, Gunnar whispered. There was no anger in his voice, just a tired resignation. He had fought real enemies, and he had no energy left for children. You're taking up a top for a bowl of soup that costs $3, Kyle said. He leaned in closer. And you're practically stealing space. Why don't you go back to the old folks' home? Or the cemetery, whichever is closer. The other kids laughed, and they thought this was peak comedy. I felt a heat rising in my chest that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. It was a cold, sharp rage. Jax. Tiny growled. I'm gonna snap his neck. Hold, I said. My voice was calm, but my hands were clenched into fists under the table. Wet. Gunnar tried to ignore them, and he tried to take another bite. He just wanted to finish his lunch. He lifted the spoon again. His hand was shaking violently now, aggravated by the stress and by the confrontation. Shake, shake, shake. Kyle was leaning on the table, tapping his fingers impatiently near Gunnar's bowl. God, and watching you eat is disgusting. Kyle sneered. It's like watching a seizure. That comment hit Gunnar hard. His hand spasmed. The spoon flew out of his grip, and it hit the rim of the bowl. Spleesh, a wave of thick, red tomato soup flew into the air. It landed on the table. It landed on Gunnar's lap. And 3 large and bright red drops landed perfectly on the toe of Kyle's pristine, white $300 sneakers. Time stopped. The diner went silent. The music seemed to cut out, and the clatter of plates vanished. Kyle looked down. He stared at his shoe. He looked like he had just been shot. My Jordans, Kyle whispered. He looked up at Gunnar, and his face twisted into ugly, pure rage. You stupid old senile freak. The sound tore through the diner. Look what you did! You ruined them! Why? And I'm sorry, Gunnar stammered. He reached for a napkin with trembling hands. I didn't mean to. Gunnar reached out to dab at the shoe. And Kyle slapped Gunnar's hand away. Hard. The sound of flesh hitting flesh echoed in the room. A 19-year-old punk had just struck a 90-year-old veteran. And, don't touch me with your shaky hands, Kyle yelled. He shoved the table hard. The bowl of soup slid off the edge and crashed onto Gunnar's lap, and soaking his trousers in hot liquid. Gunnar gasped. He didn't scream. He just looked down at the mess, his lower lip trembling. He looked small. He looked broken. And, you're pathetic, Kyle shouted. Get out of here before I drag you out. Kyle felt big. He felt powerful. He was the alpha male of the diner. And he was so busy screaming at a defenseless old man that he didn't hear the sound behind him. And the sound of 20 heavy chairs scraping back against the floor at the exact same time. The sound of 20 pairs of heavy combat boots hitting the linoleum. Chi, and Tud. Kyle didn't know it yet. But he had just made the last mistake of his social life. He didn't know that the pathetic old man had an army. And the army was on the move. The diner didn't just go quiet. It went dead. You know that feeling when the air pressure drops right before a tornado hits? That sudden and heavy vacuum where your ears pop and the birds stop singing. That's what happened inside Daisy's diner. The clatter of silverware stopped, and the sizzle of burgers on the grill stopped. Even the waitress, a sweet lady named Barb who had seen it all, froze with a coffee pot in midair. Kyle, and the kid with the frosted tips and the stained Jordans, was the only one making noise. He was breathing hard, chest heaving, adrenaline pumping through his veins, and he was staring at Gunnar, waiting for the old man to cry or to leave. He wanted the satisfaction of total victory. He didn't notice the shadow that fell over his table, and the booth was right by the window. It had been bathed in bright, unforgiving sunlight a second ago. But now, darkness. I stood directly behind Kyle, and I'm 6'4" in my boots. I weigh 260 pounds of muscle and scars. When I stand in front of the sun, I block it out completely. Kyle frowned, and he noticed the light was gone. He probably thought a cloud had passed over the sunk. He turned around to check. He didn't see a cloud. He saw a patch, and a 3-piece patch on a black leather vest. The top rocker said Motor Mafia. The center patch was a skull with piston crossbones, and the bottom rocker said the name of our city. Kyle's eyes traveled up, past the leather, past the beard, up to my eyes. My sunglasses were off, and my eyes were locked onto his like a predator locking onto a wounded rabbit. Going somewhere? I asked. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It rumbled in my chest, and low and gravelly, like a Harley idling at a red light. Kyle blinked. He took a half step back, bumping into the table he had just shoved. Kyle stammered, and he looked past me. He saw Tiny standing to my left. Tiny was cracking his knuckles. Crack, crack. It sounded like dry tree branches snapping in a storm, and he saw Breaker to my right. Breaker had a toothpick in his mouth and a look on his face that said he was bored. And Breaker only gets bored right before he breaks something. And behind wall, 20 bikers, arms crossed, staring, not blinking. The diner had become a courtroom, and the jury was wearing leather. I asked you a question, I said, stepping into his personal space. I smelled his expensive cologne. It smelled like fear now. And, are you going somewhere?
My shoes!
Kyle shrieked. His voice cracked. He pointed a shaking finger at Gunnar. Look at them. They're Jordans. And they cost $300. I didn't look at the shoes. I looked at Gunnar. Gunnar was wiping the hot tomato soup off his trousers with a thin paper napkin, and the napkin was disintegrating. The soup had soaked through to his skin. He looked humiliated. He looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. And, Jax, Gunnar whispered. His voice was trembling. It's fine. I was clumsy. I'll pay for the cleaning. You won't pay a cent, Pop, I said, softly, to him. And then I turned back to Kyle. The softness vanished. You worried about your shoes? I asked. Yes, Kyle said, gaining a little confidence because I hadn't hit him yet. And he spilled food on me. It's disgusting. He should be in a home where nurses can feed him, not out here ruining people's lunch. I looked at the soup on the floor, and then I looked at the red mark on Gunnar's hand, the spot where Kyle had slapped him. You touched him, I said. The temperature in the room dropped another 10 degrees. I just pushed his hand away. Kyle defended himself. He was making a mess. I took another step forward. Kyle hit the back of the booth. He was trapped, and you slapped a 90-year-old man, I said. You shoved a table into his chest. You poured hot soup on a veteran. He's just an old guy, Kyle yelled, and he looked at his friends for backup. Right, guys? He's just some senile old. Kyle's voice trailed off. His friends. The 3 other teenagers in varsity jackets. And they were gone. Well, not gone, but they had vanished from the fight. 2 of them were staring intently at the menu, pretending to read the breakfast specials. And the 3rd one was looking out the window, praying he was invisible. Kyle was alone on an island, and the tide was rising. Just an old guy. I repeated, and I let the words hang in the air. I reached out and grabbed a chair from the next table. I dragged it over. Scrape. I spun it around and sat down, straddling it, and so I was level with Kyle's chest. Let me tell you a story, kid said, since you like history class so much. I don't care about your stories, Kyle muttered, and though he looked terrified. You're gonna listen. Tiny rumbled from above. Or you're gonna eat that table. Kyle shut his mouth. I pointed a thumb at Gunnar, and Gunnar was still trying to clean his pants, his hands shaking violently. You see that shake? I asked. You called it disgusting. You said it looked like a seizure, and Kyle didn't answer. That's called Parkinson's, I said. But that ain't where it started. It started in 1950, in a place called the Chosin Reservoir. I leaned in closer, and it was 30 degrees below zero, not 30. 30 below. The ground was so frozen they couldn't dig foxholes. They had to stack frozen bodies to make walls for cover, and Kyle's eyes flickered to Gunnar. For the first time, he wasn't looking at a stain. He was looking at a human. Gunnar was 19, I said, same age as you, and maybe younger. While you were worried about keeping your sneakers white, he was worried about his fingers turning black from frostbite and falling off, and I grabbed Gunnar's hand. Gently, I held it up. It was trembling against my steady grip. He held a rifle for 3 days, I said. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat. And he just held the line. He watched his friends die so that people back home could sit in diners and eat burgers in peace. And I dropped Gunnar's hand gently back onto the table. He came home, I continued. I didn't ask for a parade. He didn't ask for free Jordans. He bought a motorcycle, and he started a club. A brotherhood. To protect the ones who couldn't protect themselves. I stood up. The chair scrapped again. And he is the founder of the Motor Mafia, I said. My voice rose, filling the diner. Every biker in this city, every man wearing a patch, answers to him. I leaned down, and nose to nose with Kyle. And you just slapped the king. Kyle's face went white, like sheet of paper white. He looked at the patch on my chest, and then he looked at Gunnar's old, faded cap. Caravateron. He realized suddenly and violently that he wasn't the predator. He was the prey. And I didn't know, Kyle whispered. Tears were starting to well up in his eyes. I swear, I thought he was just nobody. That's your problem, I said. And you think anyone is a nobody. You think because his hands shake he's weak. I pointed to the floor, to the puddle of tomato soup, and to the crackers crushed into the linoleum, to the mess Kyle had caused. You made a mess, I said. I'll pay for it, Kyle said quickly. He reached for his wallet. And here, I have a credit card. My dad's card, take it. Buy him lunch. Buy him 10 lunches. I slapped the wallet out of his hand, and it flew across the room and landed under a booth. We don't want your daddy's money, I said. Money is easy. Respect is hard work. I looked at Tiny, and give me your rag. Tiny reached into his back pocket. He pulled out a grease-stained gray shop rag. He uses it to wipe oil off his engine. It was dirty, and it smelled like ton W40 and road grime. Tiny tossed it to me. I caught it. I threw the dirty rag onto the table in front of Kyle, and it landed right next to his pristine white sleeve. "You got a choice, kid," I said. Kyle looked at the rag, then at me. "Choice? Option A," I said. "And what? Take this outside, just me and you, and I teach you about gravity." Kyle swallowed hard. He looked at my arms. He knew option A ended in a hospital. "And option B," I said. "You fix what you broke." I'll do option B," Kyle said immediately. "What do I do?" I pointed to the floor. "Get on your knees," I said, and the diner gasped. The waitress covered her mouth. "What?" Kyle asked. "You heard me," I said. "Get on your knees and clean up that soup." Kyle looked around, and everyone was watching. The bikers, the customers, the staff. "My pants," Kyle whined. "These are designer jeans. The floor is dirty." I leaned in, and Gunnar crawled through mud and ice for you. I whisper, "I think you can handle a little linoleum." Tiny took a step forward. "Knees." Now, Kyle looked at Tiny, and he looked at the exit. The exit was blocked by breaker. Slowly, painfully, Kyle lowered himself. He went down on one knee, then the other. He was on the floor, and right next to Gunnar's boots. He picked up the greasy shop rag. "Start scrubbing," I said. "And if you miss a spot, we start over." Kyle scrubbed, and he was on his hands and knees. His $300 sneakers were bent at the toe, creasing the leather, and his designer jeans were soaking up the dirty water and grease from the floor. Scrub, scrub. The shop rag Tiny gave him was filthy, and it was smearing oil into the tomato soup. It was making a brown, red, sticky mess. But Kyle didn't stop. He was too terrified to stop. He was crying now, silent, and humiliating tears that dripped off his nose and mixed with the soup. "You missed the spot," I said, pointing with the toe of my boot to a splatter near the table leg, and Kyle scrambled over. He wiped it up. He was breathing hard, panicking. I looked up at the booth. The other 3 teenagers were still sitting there, frozen, and trying to blend into the upholstery. "You 3, I barked. They jumped. "You think this is a spectator sport?" I asked. "You laughed, and you thought it was funny when your buddy shoved a veteran." I grabbed a stack of paper napkins from the dispenser. I threw them at the kids. They fluttered down like snow, and, "Get down there," I ordered. "Help him." "But we didn't do anything," one of them whined. Tiny took a step toward them. He didn't say a word. He just cracked his neck, and CRSK. That was enough. The 3 of them scrambled out of the booth. They hit the floor. Now, 4 high school seniors in varsity jackets were on their hands and knees, and shoulder to shoulder, scrubbing the linoleum in front of an old man they had mocked 5 minutes ago. The diner watched in silence. It was a painting of poetic justice, and Gunnar watched them. He didn't look happy. He didn't look like he was enjoying it. He just looked sad. He reached into his pocket. His hand shook, but he managed to pull out a clean, white handkerchief. He leaned down. Gunnar whispered. Kyle looked up. His face was red, streaked with tears and sweat, and he looked at the old man he had called a freak. Gunnar held out the handkerchief. "Here," Gunnar said. His voice was gentle. "Wipe your face, and you got grease on your cheek." Kyle froze. He stared at the handkerchief. He had slapped this man. He had insulted him. He had humiliated him. And now this man was offering him dignity. Kyle took the handkerchief with a shake to hand. Cal choked out. I'm so sorry, sir." "I know," Gunnar said softly. "And get up now. The floor is clean enough." The boys stood up. They were a mess. Their knees were black. Their hands were stained red and brown, and they looked like they had been working in a pit for a week. We can go now?" Kyle asked me, his voice trembling. I looked at the floor. It was spotless, and I looked at Gunnar. He gave me a small nod. "The floor is clean," I said. "But we ain't done." Kyle's shoulders slumped. "What else?"
"I did what you said."
"And you ruined his lunch," I said. "You shoved the table. You made him drop his spoon. Gunnar didn't get to finish his soup." "I'll buy him another bowl," Kyle said quickly. "And I'll buy him 10 bowls. I have a credit card." He scrambled to find his wallet under the booth where I had slapped it. He grabbed it like a lifeline. "And I'll pay for it right now," Kyle promised. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "That's generous of you, kid," I said. "But see, it's not just Gunnar who's hungry." And I turned around. I swept my arm across the back of the diner. "The boys are hungry too," I said. Kyle looked. He saw Tiny, Breaker, and the 15 other bikers sitting in the back. They were all watching him. Some were eating burgers. Some were eating pie. "What do you mean?" Kyle squeaked. I said, "You interrupted our meal. You ruined the vibe. And when the Motor Mafia gets interrupted, we get hungry." I snatched the check from our table, and then I walked over to Tiny's table and took his check. I walked to the next table, and the next. I gathered a stack of receipts. I walked back to Kyle, and I slapped the stack of paper into his greasy hand. You're paying for everyone, I said. Kyle's eyes bugged out. He looked at the receipts. But there's 20 of you, he stammered. This is gonna be like $300, 342, actually, I said, plus tip. And don't forget Barb. She's working hard. I can't. My dad will kill me, Kyle whispered. Your dad should have taught you manners, I said. Consider this a tuition fee, and education is expensive, kid. Kyle looked at his friends. They looked away. They weren't going to split this bill. Defeated, Kyle walked to the register. He was shaking, and he handed his card to Barb. Barb looked at me. She winked. She ran the card. Be proved. Kyle took the receipt. He looked like he was going to be sick. And, can we go now? He whispered. One last thing, I said. I walked Gunnar out of the booth. He stood up, leaning on his cane. He looked at Kyle, and he stood as tall as his curved spine would let him. You got strong legs, son, Gunnar said. Strong hands. Don't waste them pushing people down, and use them to pick people up. Kyle nodded. He couldn't speak. He just nodded. Get out of here, I said. The four of them ran. They didn't walk. They bolted for the door, and tripping over each other, desperate to get into the sunlight and away from the leather-clad judgment. The door swung shut behind them. Ding, ding, and the diner was quiet for a second. Then, Gunnar started laughing. It started as a wheeze, then a chuckle, and then a full belly laugh that made his shoulders shake more than the Parkinson's. $300. Gunnar laughed, wiping his eyes. Jax, you pirate. And, you absolute pirate. He got off easy, Pop, I said, sitting down opposite him. Barb, another bowl of soup for the general, and make it hot. The whole club cheered, and Gunnar looked at me. He reached across the table. His hand was still shaking, but he laid it on my arm. His grip was surprisingly strong. Thank you, son, he said. And, time, Gunnar, I said. Anytime. We finished our lunch. It tasted better than usual. Maybe it was the seasoning. Maybe it was the company. Or maybe, just maybe, and it was the taste of justice. We walked out into the heat. We fired up the bikes. The engines roared, 50 pistons firing in sync. We rode down Main Street, and people stopped and stared. They saw a gang. They saw noise. They saw trouble. They didn't see the truth. And they didn't see that we were just a bunch of guys protecting a 90-year-old hero who once held the line in the snow. So, here is the deal. The world is full of Kyles, and they are loud. They are shiny. They think they own the place because they have new shoes. But remember this story. Remember Gunnar. Strength isn't about what you wear, and it isn't about how loud you yell. Strength is quiet. Strength shakes sometimes, but strength never, ever backs down. If you see a Gunnar out there, and if you see someone fighting a battle you can't see, offer them a hand, or at least, don't spill their soup. Because you never know who is watching from the shadows, and ride safe, respect your elders, and keep the shiny side up. This is Jack signing off.